Okay, the purpose of this video is to show you how to deal with your project in Codewarrior. So let's just import it right from our memory stick. And as before, my memory stick is E drive, and if I look down here, I've kept everything I've done all semester in my workspace. So I'm just going to say OK. It's going to populate up here with everything I've done in my workspace the whole semester. Now we have our project. Let's just zoom in and take a look here. So we have our project here that we've been working on, not a lot, just setting up some basic stuff. I'm just going to click on that to bring it in. I'm going to make sure I've got copy projects into workspace selected. I'm going to go down here and say finish. Now if I slide over here, here's the project, and if I just double click, it's going to bring up the project here, and there's not much really happening in the project so far. It's just very basically got started. I'm going to bring this up full screen and take a look at some of the things that we should have in here. Right now it says final project for MCO 455, and it should actually say as well a description of what the project is, a little bit more than just final project. It should say what it is. There's about 3 or 4 different projects for this course, so whatever one it is you should put in here. Now if you've got your name, and this is not, don't put my name, put your name, but put your name, your student ID number, and your MCO 455 in your lab section. But if you have a partner, you should also include your partner's name in here. For instance, Sam Smith maybe, whoops, and whatever their student ID number is. And again, the lab section, they should match, the 2 lab sections should match. Now let's take a look at some of the things that we've got down here. We've got our standard includes, and you should have it labeled as includes. And you might want to put in a comment here as to that this is your Arduino-like library. So let's do that. So let's go down here, click, and Arduino-like library. And you're going to have a global section here, and the global section is going to deal with variables that, as you have figured out, are basically global variables. And these variables cannot be initialized here. They can be declared here but are not initialized. However, if you do have a constant array, such as this one, which is your 7-segment displays, you can put that in and initialize that, but you cannot initialize variables. It will change. Notice here we've got volatile, and make sure everything is volatile, because when you're doing variables, you want to make sure they show up on the variables list. Now I'm just going to double click this and go back and take a look at it over here. So as we move down, let's take a look at some other things that we've got in here. So we have volatile unsigned char Bob equals 0. So here we've declared Bob as a local, but we've got temp1 here declared as a global. And if you look here, we've declared it, and we have to initialize it in our main or some other function. Now this is a pretty basic bit of code here. We got LEDG equals Bob, and Bob has been initialized, as you can do in the local global, or in the local section as opposed to the global section. You can initialize local variables in the declaration. And we're going to do LEDG equals Bob, do something, Bob equals temp1, delay 500 milliseconds, and so on. And if we slide down here, let me just zoom out a little bit, and if we slide down to the bottom here and take a look at the bottom of our code, all that we have here for void do something is just temp1 plus plus. So it doesn't do very much of anything, but it does indicate, or will indicate to you, how you're going to go about troubleshooting your code. Now the first thing you want to deal with is maybe setting a breakpoint. So if you go to the screen here, let's just double click, and if we double click, notice that we've got a little ball showing up here, and that's where your breakpoint is going to be on this line, which means it's going to run your code till it hits that breakpoint. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to do the project, we're going to do the build, we're going to do everything that we normally have done in the past. We're going to say yes to saving our changes. And once we've done that, and I'm going to show you how to do a little bit of stuff at home. Now make sure again, because let's just zoom back up here, make sure that if you've got your library.h file that you've also included in the appropriate place your library_de1.lib file as well. But if we've done all that, let's go to here and do our debug. because we've already set our breakpoint, and we're going to debug as Codewarrior, as we've done in the past. And you can do a little bit, but not a lot. You have to do most of this in the lab, so I'm going to show you a little bit about what you can do. But if we click on this and go into OK, there's some things that will work and there's some things that won't work for doing the debug. So let's zoom back here. Now what I've done is I've modified this a little bit, so we've got our variables showing up over here, and it's still in the process of loading our code, and there we go. Notice up here we've set a breakpoint. That breakpoint it has here as on line 31, and so it shows you all this information about that under breakpoints, which is great. It's not all that useful yet. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go up here and we're going to run our code. So if we click on this to run, notice down here what it's done is it's already trapped out at this line here, right where we set our breakpoint. And what we want to do is let's take a look at variables. So let's click, and we've got Bob and we've got temp. Let's back up just a little bit here. And notice that right now we've got them set to 0. Now I had to go in and format these to be hexadecimal, which you can do easily. So right now at the memory browser, notice it says LEDG equals Bob. So we can flip back and forth between here. Now on the memory browser, what we want to do is again go to address 0 if we want to do a little bit of debugging. We can't do a lot with the hardware unless we're actually in the lab. So I'm just going to tell it that the cell size is going to be 1 byte. And we can see a little bit about what's going on here with LEDG. Now, if I just trace through this, and here's some of the other things, if we zoom up to the top here a little bit, this one here is called step into, and this does single stepping. We also have something here called step over. Now, step over is great when you've got real hardware, because notice down here we've got a delay milli 500. Now you'll find that when we run it in the simulator, it's just going to trap out here and won't allow us to go beyond this. And the reason for this is because it's dealing with real hardware, and when you deal with real hardware, you cannot expect the simulator to deal with this, because this is working with a timer and it's not going to work properly. So we'll comment this out and try to do a little bit of that stuff. But with real hardware, it's no problem. You'd want to step over this instruction and then go back, and it would waste 0.5 seconds and then come back with the real hardware. So here's our single step. We're just going to trace ahead, and so we've hit the single step here, and it's stopped there, but it's one more time we hit it, it's going to drop down to the next thing. Now let's flip back to variables, and we can see that Bob is 0, and it's going to say do something. So if we click ahead again, it's gone down now to temp 1, and temp 1 is now 0, and if we keep doing a single step on that, we can see that it will indeed change it to 1. It's going to come back up here and set Bob now equal to 1. Here we go. Whoops. There we go. 1. Now at this point, we're going to have a problem because it can't properly handle this function. So I'm just going to get out at this point and go back and take a look at what we were working on before. Let's just go back to C++. And if you're going to do this kind of stuff where you have functions that you can't really deal with because they're hardware, but you do want to do some troubleshooting at home, we can just comment it out. So these are some of the things you can do to set your breakpoint. Now if you want to get rid of the breakpoint, you just double click and away it goes, and you can run your code as normal. Now one of the more key aspects to this that you want to deal with is you want to save your project a number of times when it gets through different revisions. So let's just say this part of the project is working and you're quite happy with it. And what we want to do is we want to save this out. So if you remember, what we did was we went down here, up here rather, and we just basically right mouse clicked here and we said export. Now there's a couple things that you got to do before we get to here. So this is how you'd normally do it, but there's one extra step, and let's cancel out of this and go back and see what the other thing is, because you don't want it to be the same name. So we're going to right mouse click here, and we're going to go down here to rename. So what we want to do is call it something other than project, because that was our original name. So we're going to call it, say, project 2, and we're going to say OK. And what we're going to do is, and let's click up here, and this is the same program as we had before, exactly the same. So what we're going to do is we're now going to do right mouse click again, and we're going to say export, but we're going to do something a little different. Let's slide this over so we can take a little better look at it here. So we're going to say next, and notice it says project workspace, and if it doesn't say workspace, if it says something like project, erase that and get down here. So it just says workspace, and then this will be under this directory. It might say project here, and you may have to erase it. And remember to do overwrite existing files without warning, and we'll say yes. And it says main.c has been modified. Well, it did, so let's say yes to save those changes, and everything's going to be written out again. Now let's just go back and see what's going to happen. So if we've done that properly, because we want to keep multiple versions of the project, because you want to be able to show the last working version. I'm just going to delete out of the workspace what we've got here, and I'm going to go back to import, and let's take a look. So again, I'm going to browse to my folder here, and I'm just going to slide down to the bottom. And if I've done this right, let's take a look at workspace and say okay. It's going to bring all this stuff up, and if I've done this right, I should have project and project 2. So I'm going to click on this again, copy stuff into there. I'm going to say finish, and when we go back over here, we should have both of our projects, the original, and then what we can do is we can close this one, and we have a working project that if the worst case happens that when I'm working on here, and this is really just a copy of this, so I would continue on with this one. If I do 20 changes and none of them work, I can always go back and submit this as my working project. So you should have every time just rename it when you get a big chunk working and export that back out as I was showing you here, so that you always have a working version of your project for evaluation purposes. And that's basically it. Setting the breakpoints. Let's go back one last time. I want to show you one last thing. So if we go here and if we open this up a little bit more, one of the other things is you get more and more functions. You can just click on here and it goes right to the function that you've got, especially when you have lots and lots of functions. You can actually click on these green dots and it takes you right to where that function is so you can work on it. But again, as you're going through this stuff, as you make more and more changes, always create a separate project, put all the stuff in there, continue on with that, and you've got it, and everything should work properly. Now again, if you want to set a breakpoint, you can set a breakpoint, as I said, by just double clicking. You can set another breakpoint, say here, by double clicking. And if we run that up, again, we have to do a project, we have to do a build, and let's wait until it builds, and then we're going to run it up just one last time. I want to show you one last thing we can do. So if we go over here, you can say that, and again, we're just running the simulator because I have no hardware hooked up, but you should be working with the hardware in the lab. This stuff will work a lot better then. Now, since we have 2 breakpoints, one of the things you can do is you can hit the run button, and it goes right to the first breakpoint. If you got another breakpoint somewhere, you can just hit run, and it goes right to that one right away, and you can see what's going on. So you can set up multiple breakpoints and go there. Now, at some point, if you hit this again, you're going to run into problems right now because I did not comment out the delay, and it's just going to sit there. And this is one thing you can't do with real hardware, but with real hardware, it would actually just wait here for a half a second and then continue on and go right back to the next breakpoint. Last thing I want to show you is that if we hit this, and sometimes you want to just reset the microcontroller. So if you hit this, you can reset it here, and you just click on here where it says initialize target, hit reset, and everything will be set back to the default state. Now notice here, this is something called start 08, and what that is the initial startup stuff. And this is the thing that sets up your system stack, does all that kind of stuff. Not all that fun, but if you again click on here, it drops you right back to where you were, and you can continue on. Hopefully this is going to help you in doing your project. And notice up here one other thing. We've also show you now the 2 breakpoints, one's at line 30 and 32. You can add a whole bunch of breakpoints to make your troubleshooting a lot simpler, and then you can take a look at what is going on in your variables as you get to various parts. Now again, the 2 things that you're going to have is you're going to have global variables and you're going to have local variables, and it's very easy to get those confused, but make sure again, what's the last thing I want to say is here, when you're working with globals, you have to initialize them in something other than the global section. And that's it for the video. Best of luck on your project.